Good afternoon and welcome to Oneida Live. Today is Thursday, November 13th. I'm Crystal Holtz, Senior Public Relations Specialist for the Oneida Nation Communications Department. Today our guest is Jameson Wilson, Councilman on the Oneida Business Committee. Welcome, Jameson, and can you give us an update of what your area has been doing and your future initiatives?
Absolutely. Sugoli Agungweta. Hello, my relatives. Crystal, thank you for hosting today, and I'm glad to be back to provide an update here on Oneida Live. And it's been a little while since the last time I was on. I feel like it's almost a half a year. So if the audience is familiar with my updates, I usually provide comprehensive updates. And there was quite a breakthrough last night at the federal government level, so I'll do my best to provide an update there. And I'll start off by going into an update regarding our nation building initiative, or the nation building core principles, something that the Oneida Business Committee and the organization has been working to integrate into how we strategize and create that continuity of strategizing and moving initiatives forward from one term to the other. So at the beginning of November, last week, Monday and Tuesday, the Oneida Business Committee, professional staff, and the senior leadership within the organization participated in a 2-day Native Nation building seminar that was facilitated by the Native Nations Institute, NNI, which is housed at the University of Arizona. The 2-day seminar focused on how we can strengthen the nation's governance through the lens of nation building and how our values can continue to be echoed in our work for the nation. The themes of the seminar were how tribes can create and sustain effective governing institutions, shifting from short-term thinking to embracing a strategic mindset, reclaiming the development agenda and strengthening indigenous autonomy, which is sovereignty, integrating traditional governing principles and indigenous beliefs into our contemporary political structures that are supported by the people, and nurturing emerging leaders who will become nation builders and mobilizers in their communities and in Indian country. We also reflected on how the nation has had many initiatives in the past that were in alignment with the nation building strategies and the core principles. One of our standout sessions included a panel of past elected leaders who shared their unique perspectives and their experiences while they were serving for the Oneida Nation. And that panel included former tribal secretary and current Oneida Judicial Trial Court Judge Patty Heft, former Vice Chairman Greg Mattson, and former council member Lloyd Paulus. And they reflected on their respective roles in the state of the nation and politics during their time in office, and it was incredibly insightful, heartwarming, and inspiring to listen to their stories. One of the biggest takeaways from the seminar was that Oneida Nation is a pioneer in nation building, and we've been doing this stuff since time immemorial. There is now an opportunity to memorialize those pillars that guided us in our rebuilding efforts over the past 500 years. The nation building core principles of sovereignty, strong governing institutions, seventh generation thinking, cultural relevancy or cultural match, and transformational leadership is the framework the Oneida Business Committee memorialized via resolution on September 10th, 2025. And the Oneida Nation's vision and mission statement, the good mind, good governance, and nation building core principles will serve as the foundational principles of the nation. And the hope is that we are able to institutionalize the Oneida Nation building mindset throughout the organization and in the Oneida community. The next steps are to roll out more communication throughout the organization and, most importantly, to the community. The Oneida Business Committee is working on developing a communication plan to engage community, to educate Oneida Nation citizens about the nation building core principles and how we can move forward, as I mentioned earlier, strategy at the high end level, at the nation level, because in nation building we learned a lot. And we also learned, as I mentioned, that we've been doing this stuff for a while. We are pioneers of nation building. And I think one thing that we learned is who's involved with that nation building, that strategy development, and that agenda and it's nation leadership, and it's the community, and also the organization. And so we're attempting to bring everybody to the same table so we can get consensus on how to conceptualize nation building, how to instill that nation building, that Oneida Nation building mindset, and how we can institutionalize that. So we've taken the steps to memorialize it by adopting the BC resolution back on September 10th, 2025, to memorialize the nation building core principles and some of the initiatives that the business committee has put together as far as how we want to, the type of initiatives that we want to accomplish over the next several years, not just this term, but initiatives that'll carry over to next terms. However, in the resolution, it states that in the whereas and in the therefore it be resolved that each administration, we have 3-year terms, each administration is going to be able to review these initiatives to see whether or not it's something that they as leaders want to move forward with as newly elected officials or incumbents, and or if that's what the community wants to do. And if the community is saying that they want to move in a different direction, they'll have the opportunity to amend that resolution and change those initiatives. So it's a very transparent and very malleable and flexible resolution that will give us the mobility we need to make those changes, and then also to have that continuity, the continuity for strategy term over term, which is something that we haven't had. Usually we have different strategies, broad goals, and initiatives that change term over term. So we're looking for some continuity in these nation building core principles and what we hope to become the Oneida Nation building mindset. Will get us to where we want to go. But the foundational principles that are created out of this, as I stated, the Oneida Nation vision and mission statement, the good mind and the good governance principles and the nation building principles are going to now be formulated to create the foundational principles of the nation. And so that's a good foundation to start from. And so that's the update on nation building. As I mentioned, we're going to be rolling out communication to the community on what nation building is. I think when you're bringing forward these new concepts, it's important when new ideas come forward that we educate those that aren't in the know or those that aren't familiar with these new ideas, these new concepts for strategy, that they're educated on these so that they can make informed decision on whether or not they want to move forward with something like that or something like this. So education is critical, and I think that's where we need to start out when it comes to communicating this nation building effort and these core principles of nation building and our new foundational principles for the nation. So I hope that was a robust update regarding nation building. And another update I want to provide is my candidacy for the National Congress of American Indians Midwest Region Vice President position. This role serves as a Midwest representative for the 36 member tribes within the Midwest region, which consists of Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota. The primary duty for this position is to be responsible for coordination of NCAI activities in the Midwest region, serve in a leadership role for fundraising and membership activities in the Midwest region, act as liaison between the tribal and individual members in the Midwest region, and carry out duties as directed by the Executive Council and Executive Committee of the National Congress of American Indians. I'm also currently serving a partial term as co-chair of NCAI's Land and Natural Resources Committee and co-chair of the Trust Lands, Natural Resources, and Agriculture subcommittees. The NCAI leadership, it's an election year, as I mentioned, so all of the officers, the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, those officer positions are up for election, and then there's 12 regional vice presidents, technically 24. There's 2 regional vice presidents for each region. And so with that, there's these committees and subcommittees. Subcommittees report to the committees, and I've been offered the opportunity to share to carry out the co-chair responsibilities along another co-chair and I'm very excited about the responsibility. What I wanted to mention is that these co-chairs are in alignment with the election. So whenever the new president is elected for NCAI, the president, with guidance from the executive council, the chair, the secretary, and treasurer, and then even some of the 12 regional vice presidents will provide guidance to the president. President makes the call on who's going to fill those co-chairs. Then the president invites individuals to serve as co-chair for these committees and subcommittees. And my primary responsibility for these positions is to work with the Resolutions Committee and NCAI staff on the development of an agenda for those committees, both the subcommittee and committee, to review and consider resolutions submitted by individual members and member tribes of NCAI for support to be considered by the General Assembly of NCAI. So one way to provide an example, think of General Assembly as General Tribal Council for Oneida Nation. It's made up of all the individual members and member tribes of the National Congress of American Indians. And at General Assembly, we come together and we discuss issues at the national level. And those issues are derived from the communities in the different regions, the 12 different regions within the National Congress of American Indians. And so the General Assembly will all come together and they'll vote on these resolutions, and they'll also vote to elect the officers for the Executive Council or the Executive Committee of NCAI. Next week, I'll be attending the National Congress of American Indians 82nd Annual Convention and Marketplace. It'll be in Seattle, Washington, November 16th through the 21st, where voting will take place. I do want to ensure and want the community to know that no matter what additional roles that I take on in Indian country, my role as councilman of the Oneida Nation is my absolute and utmost primary responsibility and priority. So this isn't going to shift anything. Responsibilities will be added to my plate, but my role and my primary responsibility for promulgating the laws, codes, and ordinances of the Oneida Nation, along with those other council member duties and responsibilities, are my utmost primary duty and responsibility. So I'll always be focused on those first and foremost. So that's the update from NCAI. Really excited about that opportunity. And the only pathway for me to serve as an NCAI Midwest Region Vice President is to be an elected official. And so it's directly tied to my responsibility as a council member. Next, we have an update regarding the Yawʌko and the project plan, the Am Oneida Project plan. And those that may not be familiar with the project plan, the Yawʌko and project plan addresses the development of components critical to the process of identifying sustainable solutions to Oneida's critical population data issue, also known as blood quantum, which includes updating enrollment criteria for the nation. And the Yawʌko and Standing Committee was developed by directive of General Tribal Council to manage the Yawʌko and project. And so the Standing Committee is hosting a series of community input sessions where they're gathering thoughts from the community on how the nation could address its current enrollment criteria. And so right now we're actually in phase 2 of the project in round 2. So round 1 was focused on getting feedback on the current enrollment criteria. And so in round 1, we were engaging the general population of Oneida Nation members. We were reaching out to descendants. We were reaching out to the youth population. We were reaching out to elders. We're trying to not segregate, but we're trying to speak with those groups individually. And everybody else is still invited to those meetings, but when it's the descendants, when it's the veterans, when it's the youth, we want to hear specifically from those groups. And so we've done that in round 1 to kind of gauge what the overall temperature, what the feeling is, what everybody's feedback and thoughts are of our current enrollment criteria. So now that we're in phase 2, round 2 of the project plan, now we're looking at what individuals think would be components that could create a sustainable solution for our current enrollment criteria. So These have been real interesting sessions, and they've already hosted, or we've hosted focus groups for, as I mentioned, for this part, for round 2 of phase 2. We've held focus groups for veterans and descendants, and I believe that was an important step as we're trying to reach all members of our community on this topic. And it affects all our families and affects our nation, and I think that the standing committee and staff have done who have been actually coordinating these efforts have done an excellent job of ensuring these sessions are safe spaces for individuals to share their thoughts, expectations, and input as to what components are needed to create a sustainable solution to our current enrollment criteria. These conversations have been very healthy and productive, and I like the timeline and trajectory we're currently on for the completion of this project. So these community input sessions will run through the end of February, I believe, and thereafter we will be, as directed by General Tribal Council at the July 8th Special General Tribal Council meeting to discuss the Oneida Project Plan. General Tribal Council passed a directive to schedule another Special General Tribal Council meeting with the same layout and same structure of that meeting, where we had a layout that was similar to the seating arrangements at our place of gathering for our ceremonies at the Longhouse, albeit not everybody sat in their clans at the General Tribal Council meeting. I think that the aura of the aura was felt, and it was definitely a different vibe from what we're used to at a typical General Tribal Council meeting. We also suspended the Robert's Rules of Order, and that will occur again. We'll have to run that by General Tribal Council at the top of the agenda to ensure we can get buy-in for that and get support to suspend the Robert's Rules of Order. But we also had a facilitated conversation, and somebody other than the chairperson facilitated that meeting. So I think kind of changing things up how we conduct these General Tribal Council meetings, changing the decorum in one respect is really paved the way for a robust, healthy, and productive conversation, and I really look forward to the next one. That is slated to be sometime in spring. Right now, I'll say between the annual and the semi-annual meeting. Annual meetings are typically in January. Semi-annual meetings are typically in July, so somewhere in between there is when the Special General Tribal Council meeting to not reconvene, but to have another meeting about essentially these community input sessions, phase 2, round 2, where we talked about the solution. So that concludes my update regarding the project plan. Now I want to transition to the Legislative Operating Committee. And so an update on the LOC. I always like to lay the groundwork for who's on the LOC. I know not everybody knows who's on the Business Committee, who's on the Legislative, much less the Legislative Operating Committee. So to share that with you, the LOC is comprised of myself, Jameson Wilson, serving as the Legislative Operating Committee Chairman. Councilman Kirby Metoxen serves as the Vice Chairman for the Legislative Operating Committee. Councilman Jonas Hill, Councilwoman Jennifer Webster, and then Councilman Marlon Skendador round out the members of the Legislative Operating Committee. And the LOC is supported by the Legislative Reference Office, the LRO, which is made up and staffed by 3 extremely knowledgeable staff attorneys who draft the laws and guide the legislative process for the development of our laws and the amendment process for our laws. The legislative process consists of, just to break this down, this is something that I always try to educate on, as I'm a continuous learner, so I love soaking up this stuff, especially governmental processes and governing principles, so forth, and all that. And so I always hear this question about, well, what is the legislative process? How do I bring forward a law that I want to see some amendments to? How do I create a law? How do I participate in the law development process? So through the Legislative Procedures Act, which I believe was adopted in 2013, that lays the groundwork for the development of laws, codes, policies, and ordinances of the nation, and amending those laws too. So this is how the legislative process goes, starting with the review. First, anybody can submit a request to have a law amended, have a law created. and that's anybody, General Tribal Council, the Oneida Business Committee, individuals within the organization, community members, enrolled tribal members, descendants, and the general public. So really anybody can submit a request to create a law or have a law amended, and the Legislative Operating Committee will then consider that. That'll be added, that request will be added to an LOC agenda, and the Legislative Operating Committee members will consider whether or not to add that particular law or request for amendments to a current law to what is known as the active files list. It's an internal document that the Legislative Operating Committee operates off of as far as how we prioritize laws, but we're looking at trying to make that a more of a public document as well, so then there's more, not fond of the word, but I get the essence of it, is transparency. We want to be able to, by educating the community, one piece is letting them know what laws that we're working on. And so we want to front face that and make that active files list more public. And so we've done that. But continuing on through the process, I'll get to that a little bit later. After, let's say the Legislative Operating Committee adds a law to the active files list, thereafter, in a LOC work session, the LOC members will consider how to prioritize it. Should it be a high priority? Should it be a medium priority, low priority? And there's a lot of consideration that goes into that. We'll listen to the community, we'll listen to the organization, and we'll make a determination on, one, whether or not to add it. Two, is this a high, low, or high, medium, or low priority? How serious is this request? How expedient do we need to be in trying to amend or create a law? Once that's determined, we'll draft the draft law, and the research will begin. If it's a new law, we have to go through the research. If it's regardless if it's a new law or an amendment to a current law, we have to do the research, and a draft needs to be completed, and that'll be worked on in work sessions with the Legislative Reference Office, the Legislative Operating Committee, and internal subject matter experts and department staff, boards, committees, and commissions as well, who all implement the law, and we consider them the content experts, and they are. And so after that, once a draft is completed, each of these milestones will be brought forward to the LOC for approval to continue on in that legislative process. So that'll come back to the LOC at an LOC agenda for an LOC meeting, and it'll be on the agenda for consideration. So then the next part would be the draft will be accepted, approved by the LOC, and then there'll be a request by the LOC to create a legislative analysis. And after the legislative analysis is complete, we'll come back to an LOC meeting, and we'll approve that, and then we'll schedule a public meeting for that draft to be considered for comments by the community. Virtually anybody can submit a comment or their feedback on particular laws that are being created or laws that are being amended. And then after the public meeting concludes, 5 days thereafter, there will be a public comment period, which lasts up to 5 business days per the Legislative Procedures Act. And then once that closes, the LOC will take a look at those comments. We'll bring them to an LOC meeting agenda just to publicize them. Thereafter, the LOC will review those comments and provide responses to those comments that are coming from the public. Thereafter, the LOC will bring those back to an agenda, publicize our comments and responses to those public comments, and then we'll move on to the finalization of the draft of that law. Thereafter, a fiscal impact statement will be requested from the Finance Administration of the nation, and that's usually they'll be given 10 business days to complete that. Once that fiscal impact statement is completed, we will come back to the LOC meeting, and it'll be on an agenda for approval, and then we'll approve a whole packet, which includes a legislative analysis, the law, red line of the law, the resolution, a statement of effect, and then also the fiscal impact statement. And so that's considered an adoption package. The LOC will approve that and forward it to the Oneida Business Committee for final adoption. So that's the legislative process, not in a nutshell, because that was not a nutshell. That was a lot more detail. So good thing this is recorded. You guys can go back and forth about doing that. I don't know how many people are going to listen to that again. But this week, the Legislative Operating Committee is hosting a public meeting on Friday, November 14th in the BC conference room with a virtual option. The two laws that will be on display for public comment are the higher education grant law and the real property law amendments. The public meeting packet is available on the Oneida Nation website under Government Register, Public Meetings. The public meeting will then start at 12:15 p.m. and conclude when all public comments have been received. Please arrive to the public meeting either in person or on Microsoft Teams by 12:15 p.m. if you plan to submit oral comments. Written comments on the proposed amendments to the aforementioned laws can be submitted through the close of business on Friday, November 21st, 2025 to the Oneida Nation Secretary or the Legislative Reference Office in person or by U.S. mail, inter-office mail, email, or fax. And written comments can be submitted through email to the LOC at loc@oneidanation.org. Please reach out to my office if you have any questions regarding those particular laws and or public comments. You can submit them to my office as well. We're just looking to capture all feedback regarding those two laws. Our next community meeting is scheduled for January 26th, so keep an eye out for that date early next year. And we certainly need the community's input to ensure we're developing community-driven laws for our people. But one last piece I forgot regarding the legislative process is that active files list. And so I believe there should be an infographic up here shortly. And what this is something that I had asked our Legislative Reference Office to put together. And it was for the public so that they have a better understanding of the legislative process. So I asked that we put together a Gantt chart, which kind of more of like a project-based mechanism for showing the progress of a project. And I think that it really does a good job of explaining the legislative process in a nutshell. As you can see at the top, there's the titles of each of the milestones or earmarks of the legislative process. And you can see what the law is, you can see what Legislative Operating Committee member is assigned to that particular law, and then you can also see the progress and the progression of where the law is at in the legislative process. So we're working to get that added to the LOC subpage within the nation's website, and I think this is the first time that we've shared this publicly outside of some of our community engagement efforts at the farmers market. I know that's one of our strategies through our strategic plan is to engage the community. So that was one of our activities that we did within community engagement was getting out to the community at the farmers market and just talking about the legislative process, talking about some of the laws that you're seeing here on the infographic regarding the active files list for the Legislative Operating Committee. So it's just one more piece of education and transparency on letting the public know where we're at with these laws. So that concludes. You guys made it through the LOC update. We're about halfway through, so hang in there. Moving on, actually we're getting close to the end. So the last piece I have is regarding what I prefaced at the beginning of the meeting, or at the beginning of the session, is the breaking news of the reopening of the federal government. So great news that the federal government has officially ended their shutdown after a record-setting 43 days. Thank the maker, where the government is back open. So I just wanted to provide kind of like that process of getting the government back open. And how that takes place, and then also the impacts, not necessarily the impacts that happen during a shutdown. Obviously, there's federal funding tied to a lot of, with regard to treaty rights, fiduciary obligations, and trust responsibility. There's a lot of federal funding that is built into upholding, for the federal government upholding those responsibilities. So that's a big piece of it. But I'll start off with like some of the key milestones of how the government got back up and running. So there were some closed door negotiations. A bipartisan group led by the Senate Republicans and 8 moderate Democrats negotiated over the weekend to draft a funding deal acceptable for both sides. And the Senate had a key 60-40, that's a vote, 60 votes in favor, 40 votes not in favor of a procedural vote to advance the House-passed continuing resolution, also known as a CR, enabling debate and final passage. Following the procedural vote, the Senate passed the amended continuing resolution, the CR, extending government funding through January 30th, 2026, and including 3 full-year minibus appropriations. So technically, we're not out of the woods yet. We will be revisiting this situation back hopefully before January 30th of next year, the beginning of next year. The House convened after extensive break during the shutdown. I think it was 50-something days before, it was almost 2 months, and passed the continuing resolution. The vote was 222 to 209, including the same funding framework and protections for federal workers. President Trump signed the CR into law late November 12th last night, officially ending the shutdown and activating funding through January. With the law enacted, federal agencies reopened, furloughed employees returned with retroactive pay, and block services like the supplemental nutrition SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, Air traffic control and federal grant processing resumed. This means restoration of federal funding. During a shutdown, agencies like the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, IHS, Indian Health Services, and others, BIE, Bureau of Indian Education, and others often operate on limited or emergency funds. Ending the shutdown restores full funding for programs such as healthcare, education, housing, and law enforcement and tribal communities. And so it also means restoration or resumption of services, essential services like emergency healthcare, usually continuing during a shutdown, but non-essential services and administrative functions often pause. Once the shutdown ends, services like grant processing, infrastructure projects, and program support continue on and resume. It also influences our economic stability, the nation's economic stability. Tribal governments that depend on federal contracts or grants can restart projects and pay employees. This helps stabilize tribal economies that may have been disrupted during the shutdown. Trust and treaty obligations. The federal government has a legal and moral obligation, as I mentioned earlier, to uphold treaties and trust responsibilities, and that fiduciary obligation tied to those trust responsibilities for tribes. And ending a shutdown signals a return to fulfilling those obligations, though delays during shutdown can create backlogs. Long-term concerns include uncertainty for tribes, making it hard to plan budgets and services. Many tribes advocate for advance appropriations for critical services like healthcare to avoid disruptions during future shutdowns. So for like Oneida Nation, we have advance appropriations in place specifically for Indian Health Services. So we had, and advance appropriations is forward funding. So we had that taken care of for Indian Health Services. So there was no concerns there. The potential impacts of the loss of federal funding influences our ability to make future decisions. We have to ensure that our payroll programs and services, General Tribal Council mandates, et cetera, are paid first. And so going back to when we were in the shutdown, the concern was if we go past December 30th, so if we go into January 1st and we still have a shutdown, that certainly would have been concerning. The nation has contingency plans on top of contingency plans for these types of circumstances, so we had a plan for the plan. We're always prepared for these types of situations. We do have an executive budget contingency fund, and we also have a grant reserve fund. Right now, we're currently the Legislative Operating Committee with the subject matter experts of the Treasurer and the Chief Financial Officer. We're working to amend the Budget and Finances Law and transition that terminology into one, the Executive Contingency Fund and the Grant Reserve Fund into one financial sovereignty fund. So those are some of the changes that we're looking to make in just to tie in some legislative work in there. But I think that sums up the government shutdown and those types of impacts. Like I said, if the government shutdown would have went past December, would have went into January, that would have been concerning. But we do have funding set aside for these types of disruptions at the federal government level when they're tied to funding, obviously. But that concludes my update. If there are any more things that I'm involved, or there are many more things that I am involved with, but I wanted to kind of hit some of the more important updates that have been occurring recently, I'd say in the last month or two. So that's a pretty strong update from the Business Committee and the Legislative Operating Committee. As always, if anyone has any questions or concerns or would like to reach out to me for anything, please give me a call, email, or text. My office number is 920-869-4385. My email is jwilson@oneidanation.org, and my work cell is 920-764-2651. Really appreciate these opportunities to come on to Communications Facebook Live for the nation and share these updates. I think it's important that we, this is one process, one way for us to communicate to the community what we're doing and what we're doing to protect our sovereignty and all those other things that come along with it. So I think it's important, and it's a way for us to educate the community. So again, Crystal, thank you for having me on, and do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions on here. Just wait, they'll be calling you, Jameson.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
No, we appreciate your time as well. Thanks for coming on board today. I just have a couple announcements before we go. The Woodland Indian Art Show and Market are seeking volunteers to assist with this year's show. Registration takes place on Friday, November 21st, and the art show is open to the public Saturday and Sunday, the 22nd and 23rd, from 9 to 5 at the Oneida Casino Hotel. If you're interested, you can call 920-442-1120, or feel free to email info@woodlandindianart.com. Also, the Oneida Employee Health area has received more influenza vaccine for employees. Please call them at 920-405-4492 to set up an appointment. There's also on-site flu clinics during the dates and times that are currently they'll be up on the screen in just a moment. But you can contact bdenny5, BDENNY5 at oneidanation.org with questions. Just another reminder, employee bingo is November 26th at 10 p.m. Sales start at 9 p.m. And you can bring a $10 toy for a free cash drawing. The employee must have their badges, and they are allowed to bring a guest. So that sounds like fun. Just a reminder, the Oneida Bridge lighting is Thursday, November 20th, next week Thursday. And the Oneida Hymn Singers will be doing caroling, and the lights go on at 6 p.m. There will also be hot refreshments served by the Oneida veterans. Another reminder is to get your tickets to the November 29th Phoenix game against the Haskell Indian Nations University, and that is at UWGB, the Crest Center. Go to the Oneida Nation Facebook events page for more information. If you have any questions, give us a call. There'll be contact information on there. Other than that, thanks for watching Facebook Live, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you guys later.